You've been a DEA agent for 4 years when they ask whether you're willing to disappear. Not for a weekend buy bus, not for a short-term wire job, for years. Deep enough that if it works, entire networks collapse. Deep enough that if it fails, nobody will be able to separate your body from the life they buried you in. You're 31, divorced, no children, fluent in Spanish and Northern dialect slang, because your mother grew up in Chihuahua and never let you lose the accent. You know how to keep your mouth shut. You know how to listen. You know how to look poor without seeming weak. You're exactly the kind of man they send when they need someone who can vanish without leaving too much behind. The legend takes 8 months to build. You become Rafael Ortega, a transporter out of San Antonio, with prison time, gambling debt, and a brother who got cut up over a load that went missing outside Reynosa. The details are stacked carefully, one on top of another, until repetition turns them into memory. Your brother's name was Thomas. He liked boxing and cheap watches. He owed money to the wrong people. You have a burn mark added along your ribs to match the police report from a warehouse fire that never happened. By the time you make contact through a broker in Nuevo Laredo, you're not acting like Rafael. You are Rafael. The man who trained at Quantico already feels theoretical, like someone you once read about and stopped believing in. The first year is simple in the ugliest possible way. Stay useful, stay calm, stay alive. They start you low, driving, watching stash houses, sleeping in rooms where the windows don't open and the men around you keep pistols under their pillows. Every day is a test disguised as routine. They leave cash in plain sight to see whether your hands get curious. They feed you wrong information to see who repeats it. They put you in a truck with men who enjoy violence and wait to see whether you flinch at the sound of someone begging in the dark. You don't flinch, you don't skim, you don't talk too much. You pass because the rules are clean down there. Pass and live, fail and vanish. Your handlers back in Texas tell you the operation is progressing. Be patient, trust the process. You're building credibility that could break open half the corridor if you last long enough. So you last. You learn routes, faces, frequencies, payment habits, family structures. You become the man who remembers everything and panics at nothing. That gets noticed. By the end of year 2, you're coordinating drivers instead of being one. By year 3, you're handling storage and movement across 2 cities. By year 4, you know which lieutenant is sleeping with which politician's niece, which police commander wants cash instead of product, which route can survive military pressure, and which one folds the second uniforms appear on the horizon. You are no longer near the machine. You are inside it. You become valuable because you solve problems before they finish becoming problems. A driver disappears, you already know who can replace him. A checkpoint goes hot, you reroute the load before anyone has to ask. A nephew gets drunk and starts a fight in public. You make the witnesses forget what they saw. You are efficient in the way institutions dream about and men with power worship. Back in the States, your reports start building cases you'll never read. Indictments, seizures, phones lighting up in offices far from the roads you're actually driving. Every success on paper buys them more time with you. Every month you survive becomes a reason to keep you under. By year 5, you're in Culiacan more than you're in any place that still feels legally connected to your own country. By year 6, you're sitting at ranch tables after midnight while men with private airstrips and elected friends discuss supply, revenge, and succession like they're talking about weather. By year 7, the old man at the top stops referring to you as an employee. He calls you dependable. His daughter trusts you with her children during family gatherings. His brother starts sending you gifts on your birthday. You're no longer a useful outsider. You're inside the walls. That's when the real problem begins. Not the cover, not the intel, not the risk. You. The problem is that the life fits. The first time you really notice it, you're at a baptism party on a property outside Mazatlan. There's music floating over the courtyard, expensive liquor sweating in silver buckets, trays of food moving past in steady waves, and enough armed men nearby to start a small war before dessert. Children are running between tables. Women are laughing near the garden wall. Nobody's afraid because everyone important belongs there. You're standing under a string of lights with a glass in your hand and one of the boss's cousins leaning into your shoulder, and you realize you're not scanning exits. You're not memorizing names. You're not building tomorrow's report inside your head. You're just there, relaxed, included. For the first time in years, you're not protecting the mission. You're enjoying the night. That should scare you. It doesn't. It feels like rest. Like some locked muscle inside you finally unclenched without permission. You send your report the next morning. Times, vehicles, relationships, 2 names worth flagging, a possible internal rivalry. You leave out the part where you laughed too hard. You leave out the part where being treated like family felt better than any medal your real career could have handed you. The response comes back the same as always. Outstanding work, critical access. Keep going. So you keep going. Year 8, then 9. The extraction window shifts every time it gets close enough to feel real. Not yet. Too valuable. Too close. 6 more months. Then another 6. Then after this next move. Then after this next funeral. Then after this next promotion. After a while, the promises stop sounding like promises. They start sounding like filler, the bureaucratic version of someone nodding so they don't have to answer you. Rafael Ortega has a house key, favorite bars, women who know how he takes his coffee, men who call him before they call their blood relatives. The federal agent has an employee number in a storage unit full of things that probably don't matter anymore. You try to remember what you loved about the old life, the structure maybe, the certainty, the privilege of believing the lines were clear and that you lived on the correct side of them. But certainty is cheap from far away. Down here, loyalty has shape. It has names. It shows up armed at 2 a.m. when your car dies on a mountain road. It pays for funerals. It keeps secrets. It remembers favors. These men would bury you if you betrayed them. They would also die for you if the shooting started first. That kind of clarity changes something in a person. So does power, especially borrowed power that stops feeling borrowed after enough years. You stop being sure there is a clean side and a dirty side. You start thinking in terms of strength and weakness, order and chaos, men who take and men who get taken from. 10 years is long enough for those categories to harden. The line disappears slowly. That's what makes it dangerous. Not one dramatic moment, not one decision, 100 small permissions. You approve things the old version of you would have documented with shaking hands. You threaten people because Raphael would threaten them. You protect shipments because losing them would destabilize territory you now consider yours to manage. You silence disputes before they become blood feuds. And when silence doesn't work, you choose who gets hurt. All the while you still send intelligence. Not all of it. Not the kind that ends the structure. Just enough to keep the channel alive. Just enough to maintain the fiction that you're still pointed in the original direction. The contradiction lives in you like a hidden fracture. Weight bearing, always there. In year 10, your handler retires. The replacement is younger, sharper, less sentimental about the mythology of long-term undercover work. She isn't impressed by the romance of access. She wants the case closed. She wants a rest with names the public would recognize. She wants you home, cleaned up, debriefed, and useful again in a courtroom instead of a convoy. You tell her the target map isn't complete. You tell her the succession chain is still moving. You tell her one more season could open the entire northern structure. The words come out smooth because you've had a decade to make delay sound tactical. What you don't say is simpler. You don't want to go back. Back to what? An apartment? A pension path? Mandatory counseling with people who would call this trauma because they have no better word for transformation. Home isn't waiting for you. Home is the ranch compound where people hand you babies without hesitating. Home is the office where decisions get made in low voices over coffee and maps. Home is the place you were sent to poison. She can hear something changing, even if she can't name it. Her check-ins get careful, then pointed. Are you sleeping? Are you drinking too much? Are you maintaining emotional distance? Are you still committed to the objective? You answer the way you're supposed to answer because the right answers are easy after 10 years. But she's measuring the wrong thing. The issue isn't commitment. The issue is whether you still know who benefits when you win. Then the organization promotes you higher than anyone expected. Regional oversight, transport, enforcement, money movement, dispute mediation. You've reached the level every planner in Washington and Houston fantasized about when they started building Rafael Ortega in a conference room. One coordinated report could set off raids across 3 states and 2 countries. One clean burn could justify the whole decade. Instead, you drag your feet. You submit pieces, fragments, useful but survivable. You identify men who matter, never the ones whose removal would collapse the spine. You help your agency wound the organization without letting it die. At some point, you crossed from preserving your cover to preserving the life attached to it. You don't know the exact day that happened. You only know it already has. Then the old man asks to see you alone. You've been in rooms with him before, but never this room. No guards inside, no family nearby. Just him, a fan turning overhead, and a desk old enough to belong to a different country. He's slower now, thinner. The kind of sickness that money can delay but not embarrass into retreat has started eating at him. You've watched that happen up close. You've watched his sons become impatient around the edges. You've watched the family preparing itself to continue without admitting that's what it was doing. He tells you there is a leak. Loads are getting clipped with too much precision. Money men are getting arrested with too much accuracy. The pattern points upward, not a courier, not a soldier, someone trusted, someone close. Then he looks at you and says he needs you to find him. For a second, the room goes weightless. He's not accusing you. That would be easier. He's asking for help. Well, he's asking the person he trusts most to identify the person he should fear most. He's asking you to hunt the shape you're still pretending not to see in the mirror. You tell him you'll handle it. Then you drive for almost 3 hours without turning on the radio. You park in an unfinished subdivision outside the city and sit there until the sun changes angle across the windshield. There are still exits. Confess to the agency and force the burn. Confess to the organization and take whatever comes from honesty. Disappear before either side can decide for you. Or do the ugliest thing and feed them someone else. You choose the ugliest thing. There's a finance manager in the mid-tier circle who's been shaving percentages off land deals for years. Not an informant, not a traitor, just greedy. You build a case around him anyway. You move money on paper. You redirect suspicion. You place just enough evidence in just enough hands. And then you watch what follows from a measured distance, because by then you already know how these stories end for men without protection. He disappears before dawn. Everyone understands what that means. No body, no ceremony, no appeal. You don't pull the trigger, but the distinction is administrative. A man dies because you pointed in his direction and let loyalty do the rest. Your handler calls that night. She's heard movement through channels she doesn't explain. She wants to know what happened. You tell her the man was unstable and dangerous and had become a threat to your access. You tell her removing him was necessary. You tell the lie with just enough truth around it to make it easy to accept. She accepts it because the alternative would require admitting that 10 years of field work didn't produce an undercover asset. It produced a man with his own agenda. That's when the isolation becomes absolute. The agency still thinks you belong to them in principle. The organization thinks you belong to them in blood. Neither is true. You belong to the version of yourself that formed in the pressure between them, and that version doesn't report cleanly to anyone. Year 11 begins quietly. You stop sending meaningful reports, check-ins get generic, movement normal, no actionable change, monitoring succession, will advise. The channel remains technically alive while the truth drains out of it. Your handler starts probing through old protocols. Are you burned? Are you controlled? Are you being watched? No, and yes, but not in the way the questions mean. Compromise suggests outside force. This isn't compromise, this is migration. You've crossed from one system of belief into another without ever crossing a line anyone could photograph. Then the old man gets worse. Fast. The sons start maneuvering openly, allies forming and dissolving over dinners, funerals, side conversations, property visits. And your opinion matters now, not ceremonially, operationally. Men with whole corridors under them wait to hear which way you lean. You can influence succession. You can redistribute violence. You can even convince yourself that from inside this chair, you might reduce the damage, modernize the structure, limit the chaos, make it less cruel than the men around you would make it without you. That thought is poison because it arrives dressed like responsibility. You call it pragmatism. You call it adaptation. You call it protecting civilians by stabilizing bad men before worse men take over. Every corrupt official in history has probably found words that felt just as intelligent while crossing the same bridge. Then your handler disappears for nearly 2 weeks. No check-ins, no coded pressure, nothing. The package arrives at a safe address you abandoned years ago, which tells you everything before you even open it. Inside, there's a recent photograph taken at a family dinner on the ranch. You smiling, one arm around a man whose face appears on 2 separate most wanted posters. On the back, handwritten in block letters, "We know." That's all. No lecture, no accusation, just a statement, and an extraction instruction folded beneath it using protocols reserved for total operational failure. 48 hours. After that, they burn you. Name, face, origin, purpose. They will hand your biography to the very people who helped rewrite it. You spend the first night trying to identify what you actually want underneath both names. Not what the agency wants, not what Raphael wants. What the thing beneath both of them wants if it gets one honest vote. The answer, when it comes, is almost disappointing in its simplicity. You want out, not back. Out. A third country, a third life, no oath, no family, no flag. That decision becomes logistics immediately. Money isn't the issue. Over a decade, you've built reserves the DEA never documented and the organization never fully tracked. You know, document men who don't ask ideological questions. You know, ports, airfields, routes, names that only need cash and timing. You choose a place where your accent won't matter and your past won't interest anyone enough to be dangerous. A city large enough to absorb one more quiet stranger. You move fast. New passport, new birth history, cash split 3 ways, 1 bag, no keepsakes. You were trained not to love objects, and years undercover taught you the same lesson again under harsher conditions. On hour 40, one of the old man's sons finds you before you leave. Not with a gun, not yet, just questions. He says you've seemed distant. He says you're harder to read lately. He says his father trusted you, and he needs to know whether anything is wrong. You tell him no. You tell him grief makes everyone look suspicious. He studies your face long enough to make your ribs feel hollow. Then he nods like a man postponing a conclusion. You leave that night. A truck first, then a dirt road, then a crossing no one officially monitors because the terrain does the work better than men can, then a small airport where cash still solves problems faster than identity does, then ocean, then a city whose language you barely speak and whose streets don't care who you've been. Somewhere between takeoff and sunrise, Rafael Ortega stops existing. The federal agent was already gone. What lands is something thinner than a person and freer than either role ever allowed. The consequences bloom without you there to shape them. 6 days after you vanish, the agency detonates everything it has. Old reports, new photographs, financial maps. Names you buried across a decade. They hand enough truth to the organization to prove how thoroughly it was penetrated and enough intelligence to law enforcement to tear through what's left before anyone can reseal it. The purge is immediate, brutal, predictable. Men disappear, households empty out overnight. Some because they were guilty, many because paranoia never waits for proof. You read fragments about it later through local papers and translated posts, and whispers pass through old channels that still don't know where you are. Faces come back more easily than names. You remember who liked cards, who hated dogs, who cried at his daughter's quinceanera, who once drove 3 hours to help you after a rollover on a wet highway. A lot of them die because you existed in the middle long enough to poison both ends. The old man dies not long after. Officially, the illness takes him. Unofficially, maybe betrayal helped. His sons inherit pieces. The organization splinters, then stabilizes, smaller and meaner in some places, weaker and smarter in others. The agency claims strategic victory, seizures, arrests, disruption. A decade of work justified in charts and press language. They never say your name. They can't. You're proof of success contaminated by intimacy. Proof that an operation can produce its objective and still destroy the instrument so completely that nobody involved wants to look at it too closely. You live quietly now. Port work sometimes. Construction when it's available. Anything physical enough to leave the mind too tired for memory to organize itself into accusation. You don't drink much. You don't stay anywhere too long. You don't let people ask where you're from unless you've already decided they won't matter. The strangest part isn't guilt. It isn't relief either. It's the absence. After years of fear, performance, privilege, violence, and divided loyalty, you expected some dominant feeling to survive the collapse. Hatred, regret, grief, something. But what remains most days is blankness, as if you burned through the emotional material needed to respond like an ordinary man. Sometimes you dream about the ranch, the courtyard lights, the heavy air before rain, children running through armed shadows without understanding how strange that should have been. The feeling of being known without explanation, the feeling of belonging in a world that should have rejected you and somehow didn't. You were good at being Rafael Ortega, better than you were at being the version of yourself the agency recruited. That's the truth underneath all the official language. You didn't just adapt to the role. You recognized yourself inside it. The man they sent in was a disguise too. This one just lasted longer. The operation worked. You were what it cost. Now you're a rumor with calloused hands in a city that forgets people professionally. Maybe that's punishment. Maybe it's mercy. Maybe after 10 years in someone else's war, anonymity is the closest thing to justice you're going to get. That's a wrap. The story is fiction, but long-term undercover work is real, and identity erosion inside those operations is documented in ways most people never have to think about. Some people go in and come back intact enough to resume a life. Some don't. The ones who don't are usually the ones who found meaning where they were only supposed to find evidence. If this made you think, drop a comment, subscribe for more.